Hello and welcome back to Rewildology, the podcast that explores conservation, travel, and rewilding the planet. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell-Norman, conservation biologist and adventure traveler. It is a well-known fact that there is little money floating around in conservation. Unpaid internships, minimum wage jobs, and sketchy volunteer quote-unquote opportunities in exchange for experience are all too common in the field. You might even have a story or two where you've been directly affected by exploitation. I know I have. If it wasn't for my strong passion in finding creative ways to make ends meet, then I know I'd have left the field a while ago. This begs the question, how do we overcome this narrative? How do we make a more inclusive, financially stable conservation industry? To answer these questions and so much more, today we're sitting down with Laura Marsh, founder of Nova Conservation and host of the Nova Conversations podcast. Through her career, Laura experienced exploitation, overwork, and little pay, and as a solution, she founded Nova Conservation to create special ecotours that benefit on-the-ground conservation projects through the most ethical means possible. She also started the Nova Conversations podcast, a platform to openly talk about conservation's herd of elephants in the room, including exploitation, lack of diversity and inclusion, privilege, and predatory business practices that prey upon people just starting out in their careers. This conversation is actually a dual interview, making for a super fun and different podcast style. Laura and I take turns asking each other questions about our experiences in the field and the conclusions we've made along the way. I promise, not all of today's episode is heavy, but I'm grateful to finally have the opportunity to openly chat about these problems that must be addressed, and hopefully help one of you avoid the issues we've encountered throughout our careers. If you've had a similar experience or have some ideas on how to combat exploitation and conservation, please reach out to Laura or me. We'd love to chat with you and see how we, together, can make this field a much better place for anyone of any background to enter and thrive. You can do so by messaging me on Instagram at Rewildology or sending a message through the website at rewildology.com. All right, everyone, here is my dual interview with Laura.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, Brooke. It's so good to talk with you. I'm so excited about this conversation.
Oh my gosh, I am so stoked. So everyone listening, we are doing a dual interview right now, which is going to be so fun. I actually haven't done one of these yet.
You haven't?
I haven't. In like the 60 some episodes I've released, I haven't done one where we're just chatting with each other. So yeah, I'm sitting with Laura Marsh, and she is the amazing mind behind Nova Conservation, which is so exciting, and the podcast Nova
I know.
Nova Conversations. Blah, blah, blah. And
that was a stupid choice on my end because I say it backwards all the time and I get tongue twisted. So people hear it, they're like, "Oh, that's a good play on words," and I'm like, "No, it was a bad idea."
That's the first time I've tried to say them back to back. Nova Conservation and Nova Conversations.
Yeah.
You gotta think through it.
I'm just challenging your brain. Like, that's what we're doing.
Yeah, it was a good one. I got tongue tied, so.
Just pushing the limits.
Well, Laura and I have connected on so many different levels about so many things. And today is going to be amazing because I don't even know where this conversation is going to go. It's going to be great. But let's just start at square one. I'm sure that your listeners would also love to hear again, maybe more of your story. And I'm sure Rewildology would love to hear who you are as well. So jump in. Tell us who you are.
Okay. Well, I was born. No, I wanted to be a marine biologist. Going back to that, I think most young girls especially wanted to be a marine biologist and work with dolphins. I was interested in coral reefs. By the time I got to high school, I thought I would go to college along the coastline. I applied for the University of Miami and thought my life was just going to head in that direction of studying marine biology on the coast, living that lifestyle. Yet when you get a scholarship to a landlocked state, like Tennessee, which is where I'm from, you don't turn it down. It was a really good. And that, honestly, that was one of the best decisions I ever made. So like, I know your podcast probably isn't about advice or career advice, but I will say not having student loan debt was huge. And even if it means going to your public university that you don't want to go to because the fee is cheaper, it's worth it, because I found my tribe, I connected, I got into ecology and wildlife in a totally unique way, and my direction went where I couldn't have imagined, and it was beautiful and wonderful. I fell in love with East Tennessee, the Smoky Mountains, the ecosystems here. There's so many salamanders and freshwater fish and birds, and that's where I really kind of hung my cap. I love birds. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to study, and I ended up going with birds because they're so accessible. They're everywhere. And I call them the gateway drug to conservation, because if you can connect someone with a bird, then they start to think about where the bird's going. How does it migrate? How does it find food? If these trees are cut down, what's going to happen to that? And how's it going to raise babies and young? So it's a good stepping stone to get people interested in thinking about wildlife conservation. Very accessible. So that's the direction I chose. I did a lot of like environmental education, the zoo, the aquarium, nature centers, all of that type of stuff. But I really wanted to do field work. And I didn't know the Texas A&M job board wasn't on my radar in undergraduate. So that's a very common. Are you familiar with Texas A&M job board?
Yeah, I used to be on it like every single day of my life for a solid chunk of my career. Right.
As most of us are, who are trying to kind of get our foot in the door in this field. But all through undergrad, I didn't know it existed. It wasn't until after undergrad. And then, you start to use it and you're looking at these opportunities. And first of all, it's a free platform, which is great, but it's also like poorly organized. It's hard to find what you're looking for. The search is not ideal. All sorts of things that could be better. That in my mind, I'm like, I could see how this could be awesome and fixable. So the other issue with Texas A&M job board is that there's no vetting process. So a lot of times organizations like exotic cats or exotic cat researchers or sanctuaries that aren't ethical or treat their animals well or conservation focused or digging into the science and the research or re-releasing their animals back into the wild, those types of organizations can be posting on this open platform, and you can't really sort through and know what's ethical and what's not. And that it's a fine line for sure, but
especially when it comes to cats.
Yeah. It's hard to navigate, especially as an early career conservationist, someone who doesn't have the knowledge and the know-how to sort through all of that. And then there's the issue of, we're all conservationists, we're all biologists, we're working so much and getting underpaid. So I worked many field jobs after my environmental ed stint. I worked with cerulean warblers. I've worked with yellow-billed cuckoos. I've worked all over the United States. And I remember working one of my jobs at a bird banding lab and thinking, I'm getting paid, when the breakdown comes down to it, I'm getting paid $4 an hour. And I had my master's degree. Also, I got my master's in all of that too. And I had a kid. Now I have two. So fast forward to doing field jobs, getting a master's, having a baby. And now I'm working this field job. And I'm like, I have years of experience at this point. I'm getting paid $4 an hour. And is this the best way to help conservation? Like, is this with my brain and with my passion, my burning passion to help the planet, is banding birds in a swamp the best thing I can do? I don't know. It didn't feel like it. So that's when the gears started turning, like, okay, what can we really do to help conservation most effectively? And yeah, my journey to start Nova Conservation, I launched it a few years after that job. My original goal and my original thought is to bring more funds to conservation. We need to bring more money to conservation, because if the field techs aren't getting paid appropriately, if the biologists doing this research aren't even getting paid, like the principal investigators, the graduate students, sometimes the postdocs are even struggling to get paid effectively. And they have to get these projects done. So they only have a set stipend to get it done based on the grants and the fundraising and the allowance that they're given. And most of these grants doesn't go to field tech work. Most of the grants go to things like equipment and mist nets, and generally it's equipment. It's like, oh, the big tags that go on the birds or something like that. A lot of the grants don't cover the overhead. And that's a problem because we're not getting paid what we're worth. We're not getting paid. We're not getting compensated for the hard work that we do. We don't have healthcare. We don't have a union. We don't have the ability to say, this job is I'm risking my life for this job. And that's scary to me. But because it's biology and because it's field work, it's fun. So I did field work and I thought, this is just what you got to do. You have to kind of buck through it all, like muscle through it, toughen up. And that's fine. And that's good. For me, I was able to do that. But what about someone who's disabled? What about someone who can't afford to work for free? What if they want to break into the industry and they want to do field work? They have this burning passion to do field work and they can't. They're like, I have my family to take care of. My grandma's sick. I have no support system around me. How on earth can I be expected to volunteer for years and in order to just get my foot in the door in the industry? It's so unfair. It's hard. It's really challenging. I gave an entire TED talk about this, and I said it a bit more eloquently than I'm saying it now. So we can link that, and your listeners can go back and listen to it if you want. But the issue is, it really leads to a lot of privilege in conservation work. Most conservation workers full-time are privileged. They come from higher socioeconomic backgrounds, generally white. So it doesn't lead to this diversity in conservation fieldwork and the conservation industry at all, that we see that we're trying to protect the biodiversity of our planet, but yet there's no diversity in our industry. That's a problem. So that's a huge passion of mine. And I'm hoping that if I start a 501c3 nonprofit, we'll be able to address some of those issues. The other issue too is because there's too many workers and in wildlife, too many people who want to work in wildlife, and there's not enough jobs or money to sustain that. That can lead to exploitation in the industry pretty severely. So what I mean by that is there are really good organizations out there, but there are also organizations that charge a lot of money for conservation experiences or research expeditions that force you to work and pay a fee in order to do that. And you don't know what you're getting. It's not very clear. The expectations aren't clear up front. And so you pay a lot of money. And this has happened to many people. You pay a lot of money and then you end up working a job. And that is never okay, to pay to work a job. Paying to volunteer is different. If you want to give your hard-earned cash and you really want to support a great cause, excellent. I think there are so many awesome organizations that you can support, but you shouldn't pay to work a job. That's a different level. And so we're trying to kind of tease apart those variables and like, what is a job? What is a volunteer position? When is this more acceptable? When is it a little squirrely? What are some red flags to look out for? Because honestly, there are so many great conservation organizations, but they're not all the same. They're not all the same on those levels. So we're trying to find the most ethical, the most give back ones, the ones that support local communities, the ones that support Indigenous cultures, the ones that support the most research focused conservation efforts and promote them and kind of, encourage people not to go in the other direction just because it's the first thing that pops up on a Google ad. Oh, conservation expedition. I'll go with that. So that's what we're doing in a nutshell through the nonprofit side of things. And those are the discussions I'm having on my Nova Nova Conversations podcast. And then I'll stop talking because I'm talking a lot, but I want to ask you a question next.
Okay.
So what do you think about that? Because I mean, I'm on social media, I'm interacting with people, I have my thoughts. I'm trying to get an even contribution of like people who are in nonprofits who can't afford to pay their employees and they can barely afford to pay themselves. Like, I get that too. And that's such a hard struggle. But then I also see like the biologists who are like, we're not getting money either. And our industry is suffering because of it. So there's just no money to go around. So we need to find more funds. That's just where I keep settling back into. We need to find more funds for conservation, and we need to have these conversations about this issue in order to find solutions. What do you think about all that?
Yes, I completely agree. And I'll just give you some more like personal anecdotes or maybe some personal stories of how I've had the same realization. So I think that most people listening, when you go into the conservation field, you're kind of brainwashed into thinking that for-profits are bad and nonprofits are good. And the only way to make real impact is if you're working for a nonprofit. The problem that I've come to find with this thinking, and I did not have my mind changed until I worked for my first for-profit, was I made so much more impact in that for-profit than I feel like I did in my entire career in nonprofits. And the main reason why is because that for-profit had a damn good business model. And I think that's what's missing is in the nonprofit sector. So I've done a lot of business studying recently because, I'm a trained conservation biologist. I have multiple degrees in the field. But the problem with our field, and actually I think pretty much most degrees nowadays, is you don't learn how to run a business. You don't learn anything about an actual business model. And I think that gets lost in our field because we all have so much passion. And the only reason why we're in this is because we're passionate. Let's be honest, because there's really no other reason why to do this. It is emotionally draining. It is exhausting, just like you said. There's a lot of exploitation. There's almost no money to be had. So who in their right mind would voluntarily be in this field? And I think the biggest problem is since we're not properly trained in how to run a business, people don't put two and two together that nonprofit is a business type. It is a business model. So yeah, and I think that's one of the big reasons why there is not enough money in our field is because so many of these nonprofits are started out of passion, but not out of a sound business mind. And again, it took me leaving the nonprofit world because I do have really high student loan debt. I really wish somebody would have told me that exact same thing. I mean, yeah, I definitely had a different story and like when it came to that, but if I would have known now, like if I would have known then what I know now, I would have done everything completely differently. I don't regret my degrees. I don't regret my time in school, but I would have done it so differently. I probably would have taken less unpaid internships. I would have stretched out my education to be able to pay my education as I was going because I have so much student loan debt now. But yeah, there's like so many of these just things that we aren't taught as we're starting our career. It's just like, oh, you need to have that degree, you need to have that field work because that's the only way you're going to get into the field. But then no one coaches us on how to financially make that happen. So yes, even though I am a white woman, I did not grow up in money. Like I grew up in my family did everything they could. Like, do not get me wrong. The sacrifices my parents made make me want to cry. Like now that I know better, like that I've seen so much of the world, just seeing what my parents had to do to give us girls the life that we did have, like, I'm like, how can I be a parent? Because I can't even like compare to what they did. And just because I'm from like rural Southern Ohio. It's like what Dave Chappelle's called like the dusty white people. That is literally like where I'm from. It's like the part of the U.S. like is totally forgotten. And so like I didn't have the money. I had to borrow all the things. And and I didn't have any of this proper training on how to run a business. And so I needed to get a higher paying job. I'm like, I can't do this low paying. Oh my God. My first zookeeping job. So I was a zookeeper for a while.
Okay.
Because I thought that that's what I was going to do, was be a zookeeper. The first time I landed a $12 an hour job, I thought I had made it. I was like, 24,000 a year. Oh my God, I have made it. No, are you serious? That is nothing. But that was still so much higher than any of the other jobs that I had. And by this point, so by the time I landed my first $12 an hour job, I was working on my master's. So I already had a very expensive, high recognized degree from a big school. And at this point, how much debt was I already in? At least 60K in student loan debt by this point. And then I went to go get my master's, because that's what you do. Because I wanted to make a better paying job. But yeah. So with all of that combined, I'm like, I'm not making my bills. When we moved to Denver and all of this, my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and that's when I found sustainable travel and the power of sustainable travel for conservation through my master's work. And one of the top conservation travel companies in the world happens to be here in Colorado. And I'm like, you're going to freaking hire me. I don't know what I got to do. So I applied 3 times. And in my third application, there was another position coming open that I was way more qualified for. So I actually interviewed for that one. And then that's when I got the job. And I was like, until you guys all tell me no, you're going to hire me. And they did. And so that was good. And I was there for almost 3 years until the pandemic, whatever. But yeah.
I love that determination. That's cool. You're going to hire me. Yes.
Yeah. It's like, you're going, unless you tell me, Brooke, we are never hiring you, you're going to freaking hire me. And at this point, because again, I did not come from wealth. So you needed a lot of international travel to work at this company, understandably. I had 2 trips under my belt at that point, just through my master's. And that was like the biggest thing that I didn't have. So many other people that were applying had like been to 70 countries and all this other stuff. And I'm sure you can imagine what everybody looked like in the office. And yeah, so, but that was the first time when I finally landed a job there, and that my starting role, literally entry-level role, was the highest pay I had ever received in my life.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, something's going on here. Yeah. And then also what was really cool, since that company's business model is so strong, a lot of their money is donated to WWF, big conglomerate. I know everyone has their own feelings about that, but that company, so the Natural Habitat, is the official travel partner of WWF. So if you like go onto one of their trip pages for WWF, you're actually taking a NatHab tour. And because of that, they give so much money back to conservation, and then every single trip is focused on conservation as well. So
awesome.
Okay, so that is what I needed to see, that because I was also so brainwashed that the only way you're going to make real impact is sacrificing your life in a for-profit that doesn't have enough funds to pay anybody. And then I was like, oh, no, that's not the way it works. You just need a really damn good business model.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if you're a for-profit or nonprofit. That's just a way that your taxes are done, essentially, is what that actually means. It doesn't mean that you don't have a good business model. And it took me so much learning all of these things in order for me to have that realization. If I would have had that realization when I was 22, and I'm 30 now, if I would have had it when I was 22, graduating undergrad, I mean, who knows what my trajectory would have been after that. I mean, I'm super grateful, of course, for every single thing that I've experienced and gone through. But if I would have known that then, oh man, I don't know. That's why I shot it to the rooftop. It's like just because somebody's a nonprofit doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make better impact versus a for-profit. It's more of what is the ethos of the company? How is their business model? What is their dedication to sustainable practices, whatever that business is? And then what is your role in that company? And then decide. So,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Before
These
we
are all
were
the self-realizations I've learned over the years.
Yeah, that's really good. Very interesting. Yeah, before we were recording this, we were talking about this because I struggle so much with, should Nova Conservation be a nonprofit? I I just feel in my bones like it needs to be, because that's what maybe it's like a brainwash thing. Like that's how I feel I want to present myself to the world as a nonprofit. But literally every person I've talked to, a business advisor, and from a tax role, an accounting role, a business advisory role, when I explain my vision to make funds for conservation, they're like, you can do it so much more effectively by being a for-profit. And even as they say for-profit, I'm trying not to cringe, but
it takes a mindset shift.
Oh, it does.
It does.
But there's a potential to earn money. And I know in my heart that I don't want money to whatever. Like I want to give it all back, but you still need to be able to pay yourself and pay the people who are working diligently for you. And I think we can do that. I'm hoping we can do that through having a more business, for-profit model that just gives funds back. Just give funds back and make it super transparent and super clear where your money's going and why we have chosen this nonprofit to support. So for example, my very first trip is coming up in April. I am
so exciting.
It's just a day-long trip, but it's locally. I'm in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we have this super cool island. It's an urban island in the middle of downtown, and it's owned by the Audubon Society. The Audubon Society just doesn't have the funds. The local Audubon Society doesn't have the funds to help restore and preserve this island. So we're bringing people out, we're paddling. They're going to see some bird banding in action. We'll do a bird hike and learn about the island and how it's a stopover spot for migratory birds. And then their funds will go directly back into the restoration and preservation of that island as a wildlife preserve, an urban wildlife spot.
That's so cool.
So that's the model that I'm trying to work with. We find nonprofits, we partner with them, and we set up a cool excursion that just brings more funds back to the nonprofits doing the best work, supporting their workers, paying them well, paying their interns fairly for the work that they do, treating their volunteers with dignity and respect, restoring the connection to local communities. Like it's always, if you're traveling out, I'm from the US. So if you're traveling outside of the US, that partnership with the local people has to be there. There's so many examples of neocolonialism where someone comes into a country like Peru or Belize or something and just says, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're going to make money from the rainforest. You have to partner with locals. You have to. It's essential. I almost would say, yeah, anyone who doesn't respect local culture, like that's a absolutely hard no for me. not gonna happen. So
absolutely. Yeah, go ahead. Keep
well, going. I could ramble on for years, but like also training the locals. Like one of the things I want to do, I have so many ideas, Brooke. My ideas are coming on my eyeball.
Oh my gosh.
All of them. That's going to be a long podcast if we're going to get to all of them. But, but like a 1-for-1, like you pay a fee to, you go on this cool conservation focused expedition, you get to see cool animals, but at the same time, your fee also covers a local Peruvian or Brazilian who has a merit-based, need-based desire to learn ecotourism, to learn this ethical way of traveling, and then they get training and support from it's just a rediversion of funds. So they get to have that experience without having to pay, and then they can help their local communities through that. Yeah, lots of things going on, lots of ideas.
Absolutely. And again, everyone's just like, okay, Brooke, you and Laura are best friends, aren't you? I don't shut up about conservation travel. I'm pretty sure every single episode I bring it up at least once. And also, we didn't know that when we connected, that like we both have this same vision as a way to bring and fund conservation is through sustainable, well-made travel. Like we're like, we're best friends.
We're basically twins. Like I'm like, I can sense that we will get along very, very well.
Yeah.
We already are getting along very,
exactly.
Very well.
And if people who aren't seeing the recording right now, we are both blonde hair, blue eyes, like, yeah.
We even look alike.
We even look alike. We both have podcasts. Speaking of, where in the world did your podcast come out of?
What do you mean?
Like, where'd it come from?
Why did I do it?
What was your idea? Yeah. What was your idea for it?
So I think it's like with the ethical portion, ethics are so touchy. Even when I was talking earlier about like, pay to work versus paying to volunteer, when is it okay, when is it not? I seriously have spent so many hours trying to like make a flow chart of like, well, if you're this person, then it's okay if you leave here. But if you go to a touristy place that's not your home country, maybe you should pay, but only if you're from a wealthier background. Like all of these, there's so many things that go into it. And it's just not black and white. It's not black and white.
At all, no.
Oh, so I tried to have a panel where we discuss it, and I didn't moderate it well. I learned a lot through that, but I decided to have individual conversations instead about these things, so we can really go into the nuance of when something is more ethical. Doing the playing devil's advocate with a bunch of different ideas. So someone I interviewed recently, and that episode isn't released, basically said, I disagree with any form of conservation travel because you need to be in that area for at least 6 months in order to make a significant conservation impact for science. And I disagree with that, but I respectfully disagreed. I was like, I think we can travel and bring funds to the area and just redistribute it, even if it's not like it's parachute science, because you're going in not expecting to help or, bring in these ideas, science, the way we want to do it. You're going in with your money. You're seeing something cool, seeing biology at work and at play, and then that money goes into the local economy. It just has to be done right, and it has to be done well. And that's hard to find. I know you work for the Wild Source, and they are doing an amazing job of doing that, especially in countries in Africa. I love your disruptive empowerment model.
Yeah, Bill he coined that. That's like his term.
I love it. So that model basically, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm new to all this from your end, but the model is that you empower guides, local guides, to essentially start their own mini businesses through the safari. So instead of a guide being, working for a big company that is run by white Westerners, and most of the funds go to the CEOs, overhead, staff, and the guide gets just the remains. The local guide gets just the scraps. Your model is that the guide is the most important part of the safari, and they know the local knowledge and culture and wildlife, of course, but you treat them with respect and dignity, and you pay them well, and you give them the resources and infrastructure to be able to get them going on their own. So it's not super difficult for them to get more work. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, that was spot on. And I've had so many conversations with Bill about this, and anyone can go listen to that podcast as well, where I sat down and we dive really deep into this. It was actually my first episode of the Rewildology podcast, because Bill is my mentor and I was very nervous. So I was like, if anybody will give me slack, it'll be Bill. So, but it's a really great episode.
It was,
we went so deep into that, and he is also what really was a catalyst of my idea on this, is because, when he got into this field, and when he started doing, just some safaris here or there, just more out of it was fun and bringing people over, paid for his trip, he started to see that the funds weren't evenly distributed, and the guides weren't getting compensated fairly, when it was them that was the whole reason that the trip was amazing.
Right.
And so he was like, F this. And so that was one of the big reasons that the Wild Source exists. And the guides that are hired and work for the Wild Source are some of the best paid in the industry. And Bill's like, my goal is he's like, I don't want to own anything in the end. I want this to be theirs. And they have an inheritable business that they can then pass down through generations in their family. And, bringing on women biologists, because we actually have biologists at our camps, and some really cool things to come on that, which I will tell you offline, which will eventually be public, but I'll tell you more offline. But yeah, we have one of the first women trained biologists at our camp. That doesn't exist. Like that doesn't exist. And she's a local African woman who's a biologist who's going out there, and she's freaking great. She is so good, which thank God, because I'm like, she's going to be my girl for these projects we have coming up.
We're going to bond. We're going to be tight.
Yeah, we're going to bond hard. So, but when I got to know him and I got to see him, so we bonded over big cats. Like that's like our thing.
Yeah.
And to see that he had the exact same solution and that he was already like 20 years ahead of me in making this happen, that's when I was like, I'm not letting you go. So that's a big tip for people too. If you find somebody who is mentor level, do not let them go. I don't care what you need to do, even if you like call them every 3 months or whatever. So I met him in 2015 when I first moved to Denver, and then officially last August, all the right things had to come in play where I'm officially working with him as the director of conservation. And I did a lot of my master's research through the wild source and everything. So that is where all those connections happen. It just, it had to boil for about 6 years. and then that came. But yeah. So that's disruptive empowerment. That's his term. And so he's a trained wildlife biologist as well. So like that's like the whole thing. It's like wildlife biologist plan safaris and that kind of stuff. And then we're branching into some new markets now that the pandemic has exploded everything. And traveling to Africa isn't that easy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's getting easier, thankfully, but in the past 2 years have been hard, which has been devastating for local communities. I definitely do not want to just pass over that, but
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, it sucks like to be able to say like, oh, Omicron is, we planned these trips back in November or whatever, and then Omicron is canceling them and I'm losing money. But yeah, local economies who rely on tourism, especially ecotourism, are suffering so bad.
So bad. I mean, there's a lot of places around the world where that is the main form. And I mean, without tourism, there's no way Serengeti would be there. So I would really love to hear the person you had on's argument, because I would find that really fascinating, because I would also love to hear their argument on how these incredible places would still be here if it wasn't for tourism. There's no way the Great Wildebeest Migration will still be here. There's no way the Serengeti, the Mara would still be here if there wasn't millions of dollars in tourism coming in just because of that area is there, and how many thousands upon thousands and thousands of people are employed because of tourism to that area. So
I think,
that sounds interesting.
I respect this person a lot. And so I maybe she was talking specifically about like research. Not,
that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
I might have misquoted. Yeah, because researchers coming in and saying, hey, we're from whatever country, and that's fine. Like you can go research, but it also like leads to these ethical dilemmas of, well, do you really know the culture the best? Do you really know the wildlife the best? Just because we've had it in our brains that, I'm getting into all these ethical things, but like this is the sliding scale. It's so interesting to discuss. I'm not saying one way is right or wrong or whatever, but we've had it in our brains that you can be a Jane Goodall. You can go and do wildlife research in the Ngombe forest and work with chimpanzees or work with orangutans or work with big cats, and it's so accessible and easy, and you can do it, and you can. But you also, I think as we become more conservationists who are respecting wildlife and respecting the animals and the planet, you also learn to respect humans that are there. And you realize when you step into a space that's not your culture and your zone of knowledge, it takes a lot of humility, which Americans don't have a lot of humility, but it takes a lot of humility to step back and be like, okay, I'm going to delegate. I am not the smartest person here. I want you to think I am because I have degrees or yada, yada, but you might not be. And so partnering with locals is essential. And I said that before, and I say it again, like you must have their approval, their partnership. And yeah, I was going to say something else, but that's, I'll just keep rambling.
I know,
So it's so important. It's so important.
Yeah. And I think Well, I think the biggest wins, and one of the reasons why I decided to go more of this people route versus, strict field work stuff
Mhm.
is I want it to be where somebody in any place of the world can be the person who's doing the research. I don't I want to see the day where the publishing, when you go into a peer-reviewed paper, the first name on a paper matches the area that they studied.
Right. Yes.
That is what I want. And I have no idea how we get to that point. I mean, I absolutely love when I meet people through my podcast and they're just talking about, how much they've been able to share their wisdom and their knowledge from like a scientific standpoint to like children, and now they see them and being the first woman biologist in their town studying, like, I mean, one of my recent guests, she was talking about that. She's like, I met her when she was 15. Now she's the first biologist in this little town. And like,
Wow.
I've watched her grow, and like, that's powerful because that's the way it should be. Like, you shouldn't be going, at least this is the way I view it. You shouldn't have to go across the world and have a guide that looks like you.
Yeah.
If you are in a place where you're going to a completely different culture, then I know this is so utopia,
No.
but that's the way I want it to be, like, so that every single person feels empowered, that they can really just take hold of their nature, of their wildlife, of their economy, and have their own tourism companies where us, like, us tour operators, which is essentially, I'm a tour operator, you're becoming a tour operator, where we just partner with local groups.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, that's already what we do, but
Mhm.
you just have a local guide.
Mhm.
And then if you and I would go on a trip, we would be the accompaniment. We would not be the
Mhm.
center of attention.
Exactly.
Like, it's all about this local guide. I don't know how the best to find a tiger and Pinch National, Tiger Reserve, Pinch National, whatever it is. Like, I'm not the best to do that.
Nope.
We need to partner with an amazing local guide that can do that. And so that's how I view the world. And not there's so many tour operators that are not on that level yet. And
So many
yeah.
eco tour operators that are not on that
Mhm.
level. Like that's the term that I think has been greenwashed to
Mhm.
the end of the earth. Like
Mhm.
anyone can claim to be an eco tour because
Yeah.
they go outside. Like
We go to Costa Rica. We're an eco tour company.
yeah,
What does that mean?
yeah.
Define that for me, please.
Yes, let's get a little bit more granular and see where your money is actually going, see who you're actually
Mhm.
supporting, what kind of ethics you hold to, and
Exactly.
then it's reassess, because I totally agree. And that's the science aspect too. I think you said you want the name of the person to match the area where they research and are from, potentially. Is that what you mean? Or the name of the individual on the research paper, you want it to match with where they researched?
Either way, I feel like this is the same coin. Meaning, like, not all the research should be coming from, these like Western universities. Like,
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
hope that there comes a day that people, local people, wherever that is in the world, like, everybody's local to somewhere, where the economy has changed enough where enough people can get like some sort of second degrees, go get some sort of second education, where they are the ones doing the research on their wildlife and their nature. That it's not all these
Yes.
people coming in from other places and just like you said, like parachuting in and doing all the research. And again, we're not there yet, and I don't want this to sound like I'm demonizing anybody for doing that. Like,
Yeah.
I know some of my closest friends, like, they're studying in other countries, but the beautiful part of it is, like, I feel like our generation is super cognizant of this, and they don't do anything without local help or knowledge or respect or anything. It's like their knowledge is just as powerful, if not more, than my quote unquote trained knowledge that I have. So
Yeah.
I really do feel like conservation is changing as our generation gets in more like places of decision and power and starting our own organizations and getting into influential stuff, that is where conservation is going.
Yep.
And then the next level is if we don't have to go to these places at all. We can just be visitors and experience the place, but all the research is coming from the people in the areas.
Yes.
So that's my hope.
Yeah.
Sometime in my lifetime where that's the trend rather than, the exception.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing, is we have to work towards making the steps better. Like, the civil rights movement was a step in the right direction. This is another step in the right direction as society progresses and gets better. And as we know, money is an infinite resource. Like there is money in the world that we just have to kind of redirect and reroute to help make these utopian possibly dreams a more of a reality. And it is possible and it is doable. Yeah, it just takes passionate people to do it. And
yeah, like one of the ways that I plan on addressing this myself is, and I'm sure, and you sounds like you are doing something very similar, is putting together special trips that are based on people doing incredible research in these areas or doing amazing things. Like you said, partnering with nonprofits. And one of the things that I want to do has been a dream of mine that now that I've finally am working for the Wild Source will be able to come to fruition, is having a whole conservation travel series where a lot of guests actually on my podcast. I've had people from all over the world on, like partnering with them and their research or maybe someone they know. And then the only way to have access to this person is by joining one of these trips. And it'll be one of the most impactful things of your life. And then you get to meet this person. They get to be on it and we fund their research.
yeah.
Like, win, 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 win. Like most unbelievable experience of somebody's life, like coloring a giraffe, like connections to do that. Like, and then the people that we would bring would fund that whole experience. And then just imagine coloring a giraffe. Like, come on.
You get to participate in that. Like I would pay for that. I want to do that.
Exactly.
And I want to help support conservation research. Like I want to have that experience and I want to help support conservation research. So yes, there is a demographic of people who are willing to pay to get the unique experience, but also know that they're giving back to really ethical adventures, conservation, local population, like all of the things. And that it can happen. It can happen. We just gotta let them know that it exists.
Absolutely. And also too, because it's also on the other side of it, when we are going back to the very beginning of the conversation with exploitation and how there's absolutely no money, there is money in research, but it's usually very particular and there's a whole bunch of things you have to jump through a lot of the time. But if somebody who's super passionate about something that's answering a really important question that might not have funding, these private organizations could be the lifeline for their research. So then they aren't and depending on the kind of business that tour operator can bring, they might double what their funds need to be, depending on whatever model they have set up. So yeah, it's like it completely removes that whole issue out when these trips are ran in a really, really well way when there's not a pandemic.
Yeah. And so I totally agree. I love everything you're saying. I also think one thing we didn't talk about is going back to why this is such a problem for conservation in the first place. Why is conservation so underfunded? Please
explore this.
Well, it's just, like kind of going back to the root, like we do not have, in a capitalistic society that we live in, we do not have a tangible product that conservation offers.
Yes, you're right.
A tree is worth more dead than alive. What? That's a problem. That's a huge issue. What motivation is there to protect our land if it saves us money by chopping it down and putting grass in and building houses? Like that's better for the current model and the current industry that we're all working in and swimming in, which is capitalism. And not that I don't think it's going to change in our lifetime, but I think we can use the for-profit model to redirect funds to help conservation, because right now, conservation has it's only funding and grant money that gives money to conservation. Those are the two main sources. Yeah, you can have government grants and government aid and things like that, but that's kind of it.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from ecotourism. And if people knew how effective ecotourism could be as a means to really preserve and protect wild areas, I think it's worth exploring and capitalizing on a bit more, because it has the potential to do awesome things. But it also has the potential to be really dangerous if you're doing it wrong. That's tricky.
Right. And I think it just is going to take more of us in the field being educated on how to take advantage of a capitalist just way of doing things. And we're not trained in that. Like, that's the thing. We aren't trained on how to use our skills in this way. Because just like you said, it's a very consumptive consumerism base right now. So, like, how do we use that to our advantage when our goal is to reduce consumption? So how do we do that? And so, I just think it's going to take a lot of us getting really creative and really creative partnerships with people who might know better ways, or getting, partnering with a for-profit that, I don't know, they sell something, shoes, I don't know, some business that does have some sort of ethos there, and finding a way to partner with them in some way, shape, or form, like to help run our nonprofits or whatever it might be. So I think, it's just going to take a lot of thinking outside the box.
Yep.
And having conversations like when you and I sit down and like just brainstorm for a while, and getting a lot of us together and just like, okay, this is the problem. Let's try to get some different people around the table.
Right.
And what is their experience in here? Getting some really good business-minded people. Like, what do you think? Or getting some other people that are really good in leadership positions. You know what I mean? Just a diversity of people. It doesn't have to just be us in our field. We need new ideas.
Like a think tank kind of. Or
I've been actually thinking about that a lot.
Tell me more.
Putting together like a mastermind of some sort.
Like a conservation discussion on finding solutions through ethical conservation travel?
That's
specifically travel, or
more like bigger picture.
Okay.
But something like that, like getting just some creative people around the table that all have really different skill sets, and then seeing what amazing things can come out of that. I really haven't developed this idea further than that. But I feel like that's needed because my brain only knows so much.
Right, exactly. And
I've never ran a $1 billion company before. I've never successfully done X, Y, or Z, but there's many people who have.
Yes. And to your point where you were saying earlier, we weren't trained to do this type of thing. So as scientists, we weren't trained to run businesses and things like that. But I will say, in this day and age, it's pretty amazing because we can learn. If you are motivated enough, you can learn anything on the internet. If you have internet access,
anything,
and you're motivated enough, you can learn how to run a business. You can learn how to make a business plan. You can learn how to start a nonprofit. You can freaking do it. And but it does help to have that mindset of like, okay, I'm not going to play the victim mentality. I really want to do this. I really want to make the world a better place. So I'm going to grit through it and do these things. I'm going to learn how to start a business. I'm going to make the connections necessary. I'm going to find out if I can't figure something out, I'm going to find the person who can, or, just keep networking and get those connections until we can make something happen. So I will say, I love the idea of having a nonprofit that helps, especially oppressed and historically marginalized groups. That is,
oh my God, yes.
White supremacy is real. We can talk on that a different, but to get a job in wildlife biology, or to start a business, or to use your creative aspirations, you can do it. There's ways that are out there. It just takes this this mindset shift almost.
Right. And also too, I think another big disconnect that I've come to find in this field, and I really started to feel it when trying to build my podcast, is it is so hard to connect and find other people. it really is, in the sense of like how do people even find my podcast, or like your podcast, or like of just like where do I even start? Where do I even start to learn about these sort of things? Who can I connect with? Because there isn't like at least not that I found, someone can correct me, of just like more of a central place for all of us to get together. For like example, there's like amazing like women business owner networks. There's really amazing journalist networks. There's really amazing all this stuff, but I just don't feel like we really have anything like that.
I have heard of something. I have heard of something, but I haven't explored it. It's conservation networking or conservation connection, something along those lines.
I'll look that up.
I could find them maybe on Instagram, but I was talking with the person who started that for a tiny bit, and then
probably for this exact reason that we're talking about right now.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is like when you're starting your own thing, you have so many things to do that joining a networking thing, if it doesn't provide like immediate tangible benefit, it's like, okay, I'm going to put that on my list of things to look into that I'll never get to. Oh.
Right. But it's there. I wrote it down.
But it's there in like 3 different places. It's written down. But
we'll look into that.
So it's like, maybe we can add it in the show notes afterward. I'll look it up.
Yeah. I mean, because any like resource like that, I think would be super helpful. Because there's been some amazing, like zoo, because I worked in zoos for a long time. There's some amazing supportive organizations that have developed in the zoo network, which I absolutely love. And and so I don't know what for us, just like as general conservation, which also includes like the zoo world too, but like, just the conservation community, like how can we come together more and explore these ideas more and come to solutions together, and then also bring some other people with different experience to see what they might say about a certain issue, because we've never looked at it that way, because we don't have their same experience. I think about these things a lot.
Those are very good, deep, interesting questions. I'm in the mentality currently of like, I live in Chattanooga, and it's a hub for innovation and entrepreneurship, which is really great. There's a lot of local resources that I can tap into, thankfully. And so it's kind of a matter of, I start an email conversation or build a relationship with someone, and they connect me to someone, and then they connect me to someone. And over time, it becomes this beautiful sprawling network of, if I need help with accounting, I know who to go to. If I need help with bylaws or whatever, I know who to go to. But I've never considered like having it all in one place, especially just specifically for conservation. Is that what you're talking about? Like just the entrepreneurial side of things, help with that, or you're just talking conservation in general?
I think there's space for both of those.
Yeah.
I think it's probably more of what you need at the time, because not everybody needs entrepreneurial advice.
Yeah.
But maybe somebody is a researcher that's stuck in a project somewhere in some way, shape, or form, and happens to be in like a think tank or a mastermind with other people who've done research somewhere else, and be like, oh, have you thought about it this way?
Yeah. Like a research.
And then that could be a light bulb for somebody. I know I've had those with some people where I'm like, genius.
Yes.
That didn't even come close to what I was thinking. That's awesome.
Yeah. And having that mentality of being open and responsive to any ideas and any people that come through your way. Like, we don't exist in a vacuum. We need each other. Networking and partnerships are so important. I am such a fan of partnerships, because you can't do all the goals that you want to do all by yourself.
Not even close.
Yeah, we're all on this beautiful earth. We're trying to make it better. Let's work together.
Yes. I mean, I think every single time we've talked, I'm just like spewing things to you. I'm like, so there's this coming up. What do you think about this idea? And you're like, oh my gosh, that's just, thank you. And that's the exact same way I want to be with everybody. Like, If I've made a connection or have some sort of resource, please let me
Yes.
share it.
Yes.
I don't want to keep it. What good is it me just holding on to it myself?
Yes.
No good.
It's like
That
sharing.
doesn't reach your goals.
Yeah. It's like redistributing the wealth, sharing the wealth. Whatever I
Mhm.
have that I can share with others, I would like to share it. Yeah, exactly. Because I've been given so much information and help from others free of charge. So like, yeah, I'm not going to keep it to myself. I get that.
I did have a question. I really want to go back to the exploitation thing really fast.
Yes. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, it's so funny. I'm so glad that we had this interview scheduled because one of my most recent interview, she actually brought up exploitation and conservation, and she's like, "Have you had anybody on yet?" I'm like, "Actually, I am. It's scheduled on my calendar right now." So I really do want to explore this a little bit more from a solutions standpoint. So since you've like looked into this so much and have talked to so many incredible people, what are some of the ways that maybe leadership or even people who are going into their career, how should we look at this to protect ourselves and then also to empower maybe our team? Like, what are some actionable solutions in your eyes that you've found?
Okay. So the first thing that comes to mind is if you say, as a early career conservationist, if you can afford to travel, that's great. Go for it. Travel and experience other places and support local communities and support local wildlife. And you can add it to a resume, but I would be also aware if you go into an interview and just say, hey, I had this privilege to travel, but don't hire me preferentially because I could afford this. That's like a bottom-up solution of like, just make it aware, just put it out there, possibly, if the ethics concerns you at all. Then from the employee standpoint, that's important too. So if you're an employee who is trying to hire someone, don't just look at their wide, oh, I've traveled across the country and I've done all these amazing things and get sucked into that, because that means that they have inherent privilege and the ability to travel. So if you want to truly hire a diverse socioeconomic background and perspectives of people, consider their history, consider their life, consider what obstacles they've had to overcome, what barriers that were presented to them, and see how they overcame those barriers and pursued their passion for conservation regardless, not just getting sucked into the travel everywhere. So those are two solutions. As far as money solutions, it really takes emphasizing the nonprofits that are kind of doing it right, or the research institutions or organizations that have a good model for paying well, and supporting them, sharing their job postings or sharing their paid internships, sharing their experiences around. I don't want to bash anyone, because I think like there is room for growth. Like if an organization is like, oh, we should be paying better, okay, we're going to really look into that and dive in and see how we can make those changes. So we support and lift up the organizations that are doing a really good job with that. And there was another piece I was going to talk about too, and I forgot. Yeah. What do you think of that? Because I had another thought, and it might circle back.
Yeah. I'll add to that while you think. Because I have a really good example of this too. And I think that maybe something that everyone should consider is what you're asking for when you're asking for volunteers. And meaning in the sense of, is this thing that you're asking for, should it be paid for? And if it should be paid for, how can you possibly compensate them for that? And the reason why I bring that up, and I don't want to say that this is wrong. I mean, there are really people that are like, I can't afford to donate, so I want to give my time, which is also very valuable. Time is the most valuable currency we have. The most valuable currency we have. For example, for my podcast, I officially hired somebody to edit my audio. And because I finally have a stable enough job, because I've kind of gone through a lot of just job insecurity with the pandemic and launching my podcast. And so I did everything myself. The whole entire podcast is myself. And I finally got to a point where like, okay, something needs to happen if I want this to grow.
Right.
And I've just put a call out. I was like, does anybody know of an audio engineer that would be able to come on and just help me? And you want to know something so funny? Everyone was like, I know somebody, but they wouldn't be able to do it unpaid.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I would never consider doing this unless I could pay them. I would never, because to me, that's exploitation. I mean, like asking an audio engineer to edit my podcast for free? Are you serious? No, that is a really valuable skill. And so I didn't even consider it until I felt financially comfortable enough to ask somebody to please edit my episodes. And so I feel like that's just like another great example. Like I would never, either I'm doing it myself or I'm paying somebody to do it for me. And again, I mean, hopefully once the podcast, I find some way for it to make money, because right now it doesn't. It's all just coming out of my pocket, that I will be able to pay even more, because that's the actual goal here, is pretty much just to make money, just to give it away.
Yeah.
Just like you. I'm like, it's pretty much, I want to make a lot of money so I can control where it goes.
Yeah.
And who's getting the benefit of that.
Right.
So that's my actual goal. I don't need much money. I live in a 700 square foot apartment. Like, I'm fine. But yeah. So I feel like that's the example that came to mind. Everyone's like, oh yeah, I know somebody, but they're not going to do it for free. And I'm just like, don't worry about it. It's not going to be for free. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Yeah. So putting that in a little bit of a different context. So say there's a nonprofit. I'm just going to pick a country, Tanzania. I don't know any nonprofits in Tanzania personally, so it seems like a safe example. And they run a bird banding lab, and they run, crocodile research, and they run cheetah research or something like that. So if you have a group of motivated individuals who wants to pay to come out and get this really neat experience and volunteer and put their grit and their drive and their passion to see these projects in action, that's one thing. They're doing that, the goodness of their heart. They're doing that because they want that experience. And the organization really does need probably the benefit, the financial kickback, if they're paying to volunteer, paying a small fee to stay on the property. And it seems like it's fine. The expectations are set up. It's not overcharging, yada, yada. What I would caution is if that volunteer person feels like they're working a job, and that's a fine line. So if they feel like every morning they have to get up and open the bird banding mist nets and work from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. without a break, and they have no autonomy and they have no flexibility, and all these things like add up. They have to be there. They have to be there for a set amount of time. They have a certain project to do. They have a task that's being done. That's a job. It's like, no, that you need to pay someone for this work. So there's this fine line between what, and it really goes back to the expectations of both the volunteer, what they're getting out of it, and if they're getting a training, apprenticeship, learning, that's not exploitative. But then I would also caution, again, that they use those things on their resume with a grain of salt, because we don't want to make conservation more privileged than it already is in the industry. But yeah, so, and then the organizations, the nonprofits, their models, again, are kind of, because they're not businesses, they're protecting land, they're doing valuable conservation work. If a lot of cases, if they didn't have these people paying to stay, those lands would not get protected. Those species would not be protected. And it's not an ideal model, but that's the model that we're going on right now. Like that's model that a lot of organizations are basing off of right now, that they're reliant on these volunteers. And sometimes they call them interns because of the terminology used. Like if you get school credit, I want to abolish unpaid internships, but it's like a different segue kind of, it's a weird term and it shouldn't really be used, but it is in certain countries in order to get the school credit that you need to. So that's why they're called interns. Anyway, regardless, a person would pay for that experience. A person would pay for the training. And the staff and the ground does a lot of valuable work to make sure that that individual is taken care of and gets the training they need and gets a cool biological experience. Yet there's still that ethical dilemma. If the organization is all about funds and the money goes not back to conservation, not back to locals, not back to, just goes back to like a rich CEO's pocket or something like that, that's a red flag. So there's all sorts of intricacies to consider. It's not black and white. So I wrote down, volunteer versus intern, just knowing the differences, that knowing your expectations going in, knowing that the organization is reliable and where their money is going, and also just being aware and considerate of the fact that not everyone can travel for these experiences. That's what it boils down to. Yeah. So
yeah,
those are my thoughts.
That was really good. Yeah, because I felt, a lot of those things too, just trying to get my foot in the door. Like, I wasn't able to do a lot of things that would have been required for me to get into my career earlier. So because I had to pay, I've been on my own since I was 18, like I had to work multiple jobs. Like, yeah, my parents did everything they could, but they didn't also have enough money to support me at the exact same time, while I was going off into adulthood. And so I'm grateful for that experience because, I'm a hard woman. like I'm a hard, independent woman. I'm married because I want to be, not because I have to be.
Great.
But yeah, it's yeah. I don't know. It just, I just look and it's like, if my path was as hard as it was and I'm white, I can't imagine for somebody who's not white and them trying to get into this field, which is why I'm just so excited now. There's really starting to be this movement to change that.
Yeah.
Because it shouldn't, if we all look the same at the table, no. Why? No. Like, what creative ideas are going to come out of that? Maybe some, but not unless all stakeholders are at a table. Then, like, how is any actual informed decision going to be made?
We're destroying that table, and we need to make a new table. We need to make a party table. Oh, the other thing I did want to say is scholarships, subsidies. So there are some really great organizations that will pay for BIPOC individuals to get hands-on experience. Part of the trips I'm trying to lead we'll have a portion that we'll donate back to have people get in the field and experiencing biology in a way that maybe they don't have access to through their means. So scholarships, subsidies, here's an example too. If someone has scientific integrity and they want to do science and they want to research conservation, but they don't have, let's say you're in, I was talking to someone, and this is an actual example, Algeria. They were in Algeria. There's a young man in Algeria who wanted to study conservation, and the resources just aren't there. So having a need-based and merit-based and passion-fueled application process where he can get a subsidy to go work with a marine biologist for a week, that's awesome. And then he can get his name on a paper. We got to destroy that ivory tower system where to get your name on a paper, it takes going through all these hoops and working under the person who has the most publications. We need to make it more accessible. We need to make peer-reviewed research more accessible for people, because anyone can be a scientist. And it's not as hard as it seems to get your name on a peer-reviewed paper. You just have to it is hard. Let me say that. It is hard. I know that there are organizations and groups and people trying to make it easier. So the Shackleton Research Trust is the group I'm talking about that's trying to bridge that gap and bring more subsidies to allow individuals to contribute to science, participate in the scientific endeavor, and then get their name on papers so that they can pursue a research role in the future back in their home country and bring.
That's exactly what I was just talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
like my utopian view, someone's like, yeah, this is a problem. Let's actually make a solution. Oh, that's amazing.
Yes. we need more solutions out there.
Oh my God.
And there are people doing it there, and I want to support and lift them up and work with all of them because I'm so inspired by them. So however we can, redistribute wealth, redistribute knowledge, bring equity and justice to the field of conservation and to make the world a better, like our world is so diverse. Let's celebrate the diversity in all forms. And that includes in our industry. It's just rough.
That was amazing. I think that might be the perfect way to end this, unless you had something else that you wanted to chat on.
Oh gosh, it's not easy. I will just say it's not easy. There are goals and dreams and hopes. Every night, I personally go to bed thinking about all of the ways we can help. But I also don't want to exist in this like white savior mentality. Like that's not cool either. So putting your foot out there, putting your like ideas for the world to see, like even in this podcast or putting it on social media, it's really scary.
It's so scary.
It's
so
like
scary.
way scarier than I ever thought it would be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I have all these great ideas. Like, let's just talk about it. And when you go to like post, you're like, what are people going to say? What if someone says this? What if someone says that? So I guess I'm saying that just because I'm finally getting to a place, not quite there, like 100%, but I'm almost there where I don't want to care what people think about me because I know my heart and my intent is good. But yet it can be so distorted and manipulated on social media or through, like, if you don't know someone really, like, don't judge them, you know, like, that's why I love the podcast form, those long form discussions. And you really get to see the heart of a person come out in a way that's special and enlightening and fresh and breaks through the cancel culture or breaks through just like the black and white mentality that like anytime you do X, it's bad, or any time you don't recycle your bottle, you're horrible. Like, there's more nuance in the world. We gotta support each other. We gotta love each other and work together to do that. To find solutions.
And that's why I love how I've set up my podcast is I want all ideas on, because one, we need to hear what other people's solutions are. And if there is somebody that has an opposite view, then need to listen to why. I've had some guests on where I didn't agree with what they said. And sometimes I get people that reach out, they're like, or they might, well, why did you allow that person to say that? And I'm like, you missed the point. There's a reason why they're on the podcast. We all need to hear what each other is thinking because we're all coming at this with a conservation lens. And if that is their solution, then you probably should hear what they're talking about. And I've heard this on, so many different ways. You know, people who are super pro-hunting, other people that are super anti-hunting, people that are super this, super that, and they're all like very convicted in their way of doing conservation. And my point is, none of them's wrong. Nobody's wrong. If somebody was 100% right, all of our problems would be gone.
Right.
But they're not.
Yes.
So that means the more viewpoints we have out in the open, then the better. To hear what somebody who's on the opposite conservation aisle as you, whatever that means, you need to listen to that. And from like an objective standpoint. And that's one thing that I really love about the platform that I've built is just talking to so many people about so many different things and really getting into their story and how that idea of conservation came to be. Because when you go through the whole story with somebody, you understand why they got to where they are today. Yeah. The full picture, it's a full picture. Instead of just going into an interview and be like, what is your viewpoint? What is your science? and then not having the full picture.
Right.
Yeah. And then, yeah, just getting over the personal fear of somebody attacking me or one of my guests, which I'm sure that'll happen more and more as the podcast gets bigger, because there's just a bigger pool of people, But luckily I haven't dealt with too much of that yet. But it is definitely a thing. I mean, it's one of the scariest parts about doing this in the first place. I'm a conservation biologist. I'm not a podcast social media influencer.
Right. I know.
So, like, what? Who am I to do this? And it's like, well, who am I to not do this? So, yeah.
Well, I did want to just ask, what was your master's work? Because you said it led you to doing the conservation travel that you're doing now. And so just briefly, what is that storyline that you started as conservation biologist, interested in big cats, and now you're doing conservation travel to help people and habitats?
Yeah. So I went through the Global Field Program, which I'm sure a lot of people listening has probably heard of by this point. So since I didn't get outside of the U.S. ever, I barely got outside of Ohio growing up, I found this master's program. Well, one, I was going to be a veterinarian, and I really was. I was going to be a zoological veterinarian. And I mean, I applied, I interviewed, I did everything. And then during my interview, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to do this, which is like the worst and best time to figure that out.
No.
That you don't want to be a vet is your senior year as you're sitting in an interview chair for vet school. So yeah, fate took over there. Wow. But I knew I wanted to do some sort of post-secondary. I was working at the Columbus Zoo at the time. And so the GFP is based out of Miami University, which is in Ohio. Miami University of Oxford. And I found this program and I was like, oh my God, it is all online and I get to go on 3 international trips to learn conservation on the ground. Is this real life? And I found the program, and then, I don't know, like the deadline was like 10 days later or something. So I just made like a whim and I went for it and I applied and I got in. Wow. And this is the first time that I was ever exposed to, so first I started looking at the big cat trade in the United States, which is a terrible topic, which actually is going to be on my podcast here really soon, which is funny. But that is where I started. And I was like, I can't do this. It's so depressing. I just can't. I need to find something else. And that is getting into big cat literature and from like a conservation solution standpoint. Because, that was the whole reason why I did all of this. Like, what's the actual solution here? And one of the strongest tools that I found was conservation travel for mitigating human-wildlife conflict. And especially with big cats, who are some of the most conflict-ridden species there are on the planet. And so I was like, oh my God, I need to look more into this and start going and researching this. And that is also around the same time that I met Bill. Okay. And because my boyfriend, he got a position in Denver and it was very fast. Like we had like a 2-week notice. Wow. And so I didn't have a job yet when we moved here. We moved from Dallas. I was at the Dallas Zoo. And I found Bill just researching online and I'm like, oh my God, you have all of my same ethos. At this point, I was already in my master's, so I'd already started to find the power. I was starting to do some research about conservation travel and big cats. And then I found him and I'm like, oh my God, this is the solution. And so I did some like big cat empathy research projects, like interviewing his African safari participants and stuff, which was really cool. And now we're doing something even on a significantly bigger scale soon, which I'll tell you about that stuff. I'll tell you about it. But yeah. So that's how really that came to be. And then I was like, I just freaking like just blinders on. Yeah. This is the path I'm going down. Yeah. I have no idea how to get into the field. The only international travel I have is through my master's work. And then that's when I found NADHAB and I applied 1,000,000 times until I got in. Okay. And then I ended up traveling a lot more with them. So that's the journey.
So you essentially kind of got to this place of like, if I really want to help conservation and big cats, it's going to be through this model, this frame of work, this travel aspect. That's the best way we can help conservation. Is that correct?
Yeah. Because I was like, okay, I could spend all of my resources as a zoological veterinarian, which this is so funny. When I told my dad that I was like, yeah, I'm not going to be a veterinarian anymore, he's like, yeah, I don't see you putting shots in tigers' asses. Like, that's literally what he said. He's like, yeah, I knew you were going to come to this realization, but you came to it on your own. So I thought that was really, really funny. But yeah, yes, because I was like, okay, so I could go out into the field and be with these big cats all the time. But there's already so many people doing that. There's already so much good research out there. There really isn't that much more research that really can be done, honestly. So is that the best way for me to spend my finite life on this planet? Is to just be with the cats, which is really what I want to do? Or should I spend my time in what I feel and what I see as a much bigger impact? So that is why I got into conservation travel. And I just am so grateful now that I never stopped, because my past decade of work, I feel, has finally come to a head. Like I finally realized it a couple months ago. I just turned 30 and I was like, wow, everything I've done since I turned like 20 has finally come to fruition. Like right now. I have the title that I want. I'm working with my mentor. I have this incredible platform that I've built, all of which are super scary things
It is.
that I just did anyway. So yeah, I mean, and I was born, or whatever somebody believes. I have the personality that I have. I am a people person.
Huh?
So, and not many scientists are, which is totally fine. So like, let's all work in our lanes. Like you're really good at this. I'm really good at this. Let's partner together. Like, and lift everybody up in the process.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So that's how I viewed it. Like, yes, I could be a fantastic, amazing scientist in the field, but is that the best way to spend my life? And going through and doing all these things and exploring these different paths, I was like, no, that's not where I should put my life.
Yeah.
My life is doing this. And yeah, we'll see if I say the same thing when I'm 40. We'll see. I don't know. But that's where I'm at now.
Yeah. That's what we have to remember. This is where I am now. And this is a lifetime progression of learning and growing. But I think the last 3 or 4 minutes of what you just said were like, I could have said the same thing. Like my 20s were for figuring it out. And now I'm about to turn 34, even though I look like I'm 17.
Yeah, keep living that up, girl. You look great. And you're a mom. Awesome.
So like, yeah, you just like, I know what I'm like, this feels so good and so right. And all of this, the decade of the 20s was culminating in me figuring out what I'm doing now and how to have a purposeful life.
Yeah.
Love it.
We
are twins.
Yes, we are. It took just not letting the fear stop me or you. And I think that's one of my biggest pieces of advice for anyone listening. If it's scary, that means it's outside of your comfort zone. And that probably means you should do it. Not everything. But if it feels right and it's super scary, you should probably do it.
I mean, I've worked so much on my mentality and my spiritual like growth and stuff. Like there's a book called You Are a Badass, which I've read probably like 5 or 6 times. Do I agree with everything?
I love that.
No, I have not. I do not agree with everything, but it's still very useful to change. Like, you are destined for awesome things. You are a badass. I've worked with a life coach. She helped me with my TED Talk and getting over the fears of standing in front of people and saying these things, and the potential that someone might not like it or someone might disagree. I've had really good conversations. I've had really bad conversations. I've had conversations with people agreeing with everything. I've had conversations where someone will respectfully disagree and we can find solutions together and grow and move forward. And that's okay. Like, this is all a learning process. So it's all about growth, and don't be stagnant. And yeah, now I feel like I'm a mini life coach here for your audience.
No, that's good. That's good. I feel like, yeah, this there's been a lot of really great pointers out of this episode, which I was really hoping for. And I hope that for both of our audiences that there's a lot to take away, and whatever it is that somebody needs right now. We all are different parts of our career, of our personal growth, of our personal development. But I will say that right now you have two women that have pursued what they felt is right. And are we anywhere close to where we want to be? No. We still have a lot of growth that we know we need to do, but we have at least taken the first big step in that right direction. And that's always the first step is the scariest step.
And they get easier. They're getting easier. It's getting easier.
Yeah, they're getting way easier as my confidence builds in myself and my abilities, as I watch my platform grow, as I get more positive feedback. It's like, okay, I am doing what I should be.
That's the beautiful thing too about social media. Sometimes even just one message where someone says, hey, your podcast inspired me. Hey, I shared it with someone else. Hey, these are really important stories. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for talking about this. No one talks about this. You know, like, I'm like, okay, that keeps me going.
Yes.
So it's all very good. Brooke, I feel like we've tried to wrap up for a few times now and we just keep talking and just keep going. And for the sake of our time and our listeners' time, maybe we'll do another in a few months. We'll check in with each other and do another episode and see where we're at and talk about more of these things. Because I love that. I could talk forever. I really could.
I'm sure that by that point with how busy you and I are every single day, we'll have a lot to talk about at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Just even a few months from now, it'll be like, oh, yes, I'm doing this, which is totally different. And now, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. Thanks.
Well, awesome, Laura. Thanks again. This has been amazing.
Yes. Thank you for doing this dual interview and being willing to make this happen, make this a reality. I love it.
Hey, thanks again for listening to this episode of Rewildology. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button to never miss a future episode. Do you have a cool environmental organization, travel, story, or research that you'd like to share? Let me know at rewildology.com. Until next time, friends, together we will rewild the planet.